Today's daf is daf Nun Aleph, and we'll start on the last line of Nun Amid Beis. Iboiluhu, the Rabbi Chanina. Ksuvim uksuvim boy. Does Rabbi Chanina hold that to collect from Mishubadim, we need both a set amount of money and that it be written in the shtar? Let's explain. The Gemara is vacillating on the following question. If a chov is recorded in a shtar, then there's something called hotzaas kol. The knowledge about that shtar and that chov is public, so that people will know and be forewarned that if they go ahead and purchase karka, there's a shibud on the karka. Secondly, in order for people to be adequately forewarned, they have to know exactly how much money is involved. That's called ktsuvin. And here on the top of Daf Nun Aleph, O Dilma, the other possibility is maybe where Rabbi Chanina says that you collect chovos from Mishubadim, ktsuvim, all he needs is one condition, namely that the amount of money or the general time period in which the chov will emerge is set, is limited, is known, it's finite. Even if it's not written in the shtar. So, for example, there's something called achilas peros, and we're going to see whether or not there is a shibud on achilas peros. Achilas peros is something that's not kotzuv. You don't know how many fruits you'll have and how much it'll take to support a woman and so forth and so on. So now what the Gemara is going to do is it's going to quote a statement of Rab Chanina himself. And this is going to lead to a machlokes between Rab Chanina and Rab Yochanan. But the position of Rab Chanina is going to be a clear-cut answer to the Gemara's question about which it vacillated. So let's now introduce the machlokes Rab Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina that we're about to learn with the following presentation. The Chachamim made a takana that after a person dies, his daughters will be supported from his estate. And that halacha only applies up until, but not beyond the point they get married. Now, in addition, there's another halacha which is called asiris minachasim, and that's in the dunya. In order for a woman to be attractive on the marketplace and people want to marry her, it's necessary that she is given a tenth of the nechasim as an dunya, as a dowry. Now we're going to have a machlokes between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan regarding this halacha of 1/10. Isur nechasim. Toshma de Itmar, Misha Meis, V'niach Shtei Banos Uben. So we have now 3 heirs, 2 girls, each of which will get married and will want Asiris Nechasim and a son. However, what happened? Kodma Rishon V'not Lo Isur Nechasim. The first of the 2 daughters got married and collected 1/10 of the nechasim as a dowry. But in the meantime, the second daughter did not get married, so she didn't collect her 1/10. And now the entire Yerusha falls in front of the Banos with the death of the Ben. So the father died, and now the son died, and now the 2 daughters are splitting the Yerusha. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shnia Vitra. Vitra here means Ibda. The second of the 2 daughters who did not collect her Asiris Nechasim, Ibda, she lost her rights to Asiris Nechasim, which means that the entire takana was instituted to make a woman more attractive, so she'll have an adunya, but in this case, she gets half of the Yerusha. Half of the Yerusha is 40% more than 10%. The Amalei Rab Chanina says, I don't get it. The halacha of Isur Nechasim of a woman who inherits right off the top, cream it off the top, 10% of her father's estate, that's something that's collectible from Mishubadim. And that's called parnasa. Gedola mizu amru motzia leparnasa ve'en motzia lemizonos. So parnasa means nidunya, and she collects 10% of her father's estate, even from lekuchos, meaning even if he sold property, she can go to those buyers and collect her isa nechasim. That's how powerful the chiyuv of isa nechasim is. That's called parnasa. However, when it comes to mizonos, that a woman has a right after her father's death to be supported with food and clothing and shelter and so forth from the estate of her late father, then she cannot collect mizonos from lekuchos. The shibud is only on the nechasim themselves as long as they're bnei chori in the possession of the estate. V'at amrit shniya vitra. I mean, the halacha of isa nechasim parnasa is so powerful that as opposed to mizonos, you can collect it from mishubadim, from the lekuchos. And now you're telling me because the second daughter did not collect her isa nechasim, her parnasa, therefore she loses it. Why should she lose it? She has rights to that 10%. And that's the argument of Rabbi Chanina against Rabbi Yochanan. So now let's see what we're going to prove for our sugya about ksuvim and ksuvim as far as shibudim are concerned. V'parnasa, to make its kaitza, but michtav lo ksiva. Well, it's true that 10% is a set amount, and therefore the lekuchos are well warned in advance about the amount of money included in the chiyuv parnasa, but it's not written in any shtar. And if it's not written in any shtar, then if we're going to require, according to Reb Chanina, which was one side, both ksuvim and ksuvim, then although you can check off the requirement of ksuvim in the case of parnasa, but you cannot check off the requirement of ksuvim. It's not written in any shtar. The kamotzion, yet she collects her parnasa, the 10%, from mishubadim. So we now prove that in order to collect mishubadim, all you need is katzuv, even if it's not kos. And the Gemara rejects it. Shiny parnasa came with the islay kola command the ksivadam. The whole purpose of requiring ksiva in a shtar in order to generate shibudim and collect from lekuchos is to send out a call. But in the case of parnasa, which means isa nechasim, that's well known. That's already public knowledge. You don't need a shtar to actually set to be motzi kol. And therefore, the original suffix on Rabbi Chanina is still in place. In general, when there's no kol, does he require not only katsu, but also kasu? And the Gemara is going to now quote a Mishnah in Masechet Ksubas on Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. And the Gemara is quoting this Mishnah to raise an objection on Ula. Ula was of the opinion that all you need is shtar, kasuv, and you don't need katsuv at all. And you can collect from mishubadim with kasuv without katsuv. Now, this Mishnah in Ksubis is going to address the case of a person who married a woman who had a daughter from her first marriage. So it's a second marriage for her, and he took upon himself a hischayvus. But here we have to add two important words, and we can't overemphasize them. Baal peh, meaning that there was no shtar. We'll soon see later on whether or not there was a kinyan sudar. But be as that as may, he committed himself to support his stepdaughter from his wife's previous marriage for a period of 5 years. Now he divorces his wife. She gets married to someone else, and that someone else likewise took upon himself his chayvus to support her daughter for 5 years. So there's a 5-year period in which is an overlap of 2 different husbands to support for 5 years this daughter, who is a stepdaughter to both of these 2 husbands. Now, I'm going to assume that she doesn't cash in twice. I couldn't find anyone who discussed this, but rather they split her mizonos down the middle. Each one pays 50%. So this is called Bas Ishto, his stepdaughter. And that's the Mishnah in Masechet Ksubis, that both of them are obligated to support her for 5 years. Now the Mishnah continues, and they both die within the 5-year period of time. Masiv Rav Huna Bar Manoach, based on this Mishnah in Ksubis, Benoseim, the 2 daughters of these 2 husbands, they are biological daughters. So each of these 2 husbands has a biological daughter, or more than one, as well as the stepdaughter, their wife's daughter from a previous marriage. And here we're going to make a split. As far as their own biological daughters are concerned, after their death, they will be supported. There's no collection of shibudim for mizonos. And this is a fundamental principle called Ein Motziin Lemazon Ha'isha V'Abanos Minachasim Mishubadim. Now, what about Bas Ishto? Vehi Nizones Minachasim Mishubadim. And yet, the stepdaughter will be supported, if need be, from the lekuchos, meaning through shibudim. Now, we said that this, his chayvus on the part of the Baal for his stepdaughter was Baal Peh. And yet, his collection from mishubadim, Neshehi Balas Cho. This is not money that's being paid through the Chi of Mizonos. This is a separate chayvus. And if it's independent chayvus, and it's a dover katsuv, because it's only a 5-year period, then it's collectible from lekuchos, from mishubadim. So we see clearly from this Mishnah that all you need is katsuv. You don't need katsuv because it was not written in a shtar. It was his chayvus Baal Peh. And Ula was the one who said, back on Nunam at Beis, that when is a chov collectible from mishubadim, that's only if it's written in a shtar. In fact, Ula waived the requirement of katsuv, but insisted that it all boils down to one single requirement, namely kasuv. And this is not kasuv in the case of a husband who took upon himself an oral declaration of his chayvus, of commitment to support his stepdaughter for 5 years. And it was an oral commitment that was not written in a shtar. How then, according to Ula, can the Mishnah in Ksubis claim that this his chayvus can be collected from mishubadim? And the Gemara answers, although it's true that there was not a shtar written and inscribed, there was no inscribing in a document that the father took upon himself a 5-year period of support for his stepdaughter, but nevertheless, they did effectuate a kinyan sudar. And this I heard from Rav Soloveitchik many times, that any ischayvus, in order to be binding, requires a kinyan sudar, because a kinyan sudar is the most powerful and all-inclusive kinyan that we have. Every other kinyan is restricted, it's limited, but not a kinyan sudar. A kinyan sudar is all-encompassing, and it includes even ischayvus. So if you want to clinch a ischayvus, then you do so with a kinyan sudar. Like, for example, under the chuppah, the Rav will require a kinyan suda from the Baal to be mischayev for the ksuba. I mean, that's a problem because l'chora, the ksuba itself, once he hands it over to his wife, that itself should effectuate a hischayvus. In any event, we have a principle called stam kinyan l'ksiva omed, which means that we always assume that after Adam witnessed a kinyan suda, like the case of ksuba, they write it down in a shtar and they sign the shtar. So therefore, this is not a Mishnah that contradicts Ula. On the contrary, this Mishnah is claiming that since the stepfather accepted upon himself with a kinyan suda in front of Adam that he would support his stepdaughter, meaning his wife's daughter from a previous marriage for a period of 5 years, then there's no doubt that they wrote up the hischayvus in a shtar, because that's what Adam do after witnessing a kinyan suda. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: Hachi banos namin. What about the biological daughters of this father who died? After all, let's assume that if the Mishnah is comparing that and contrasting that case of biological daughters with stepdaughters, it must be assuming that there was a kinyan suda in both cases. So therefore, if there was a kinyan suda, why does the Mishnah say that collection of the mizonos for his biological daughter is not collectible from the lekuchos, from shibudin? After all, it's a chiyuv b'shtar, and any chov b'shtar is collectible from mishubadin. And the Gemara answers b'shakanu lezu v'lo kanu lezu. There was only a kinyan suda on behalf of the stepdaughter in that iskaivus, but not on behalf of the mizonos of his biological daughter. So the Gemara asks my pascha, why is the Tana talking about this very strange two scenarios? One scenario in which vis-a-vis the iskaivus of Bas Ishto, there was a kinyan, but vis-a-vis the mizonos for his biological daughter, there was no kinyan. It's arbitrary. And the Gemara answers, Bas Ishto dahavi v'shas kinyan mahani lo kinyan bito dahavi v'shas kinyan lo mahani lo kinyan. A kinyan could only be valid for someone who's alive. So if you make a kinyan on behalf of, for example, Bas Ishto, that he married this woman and she brought in a daughter from a previous marriage, that clearly that daughter is alive and well at the time that the husband, the stepfather, took upon himself a hischayvus to support his stepdaughter, and therefore the kinyan is valid. But as far as his biological daughter is concerned, we're talking about a chiyuv that emerges with the marriage itself. At the time of the nisuin, in the framework of the ksuba, he takes upon himself that his daughters from this marriage, who will be born in the future, will be supported from his estate. But at the time of the marriage, clearly this daughter is not alive yet. Unless, again, he had many, many marriages. But let's assume this is a first marriage. And lo mani le kinyan means you can't make a kinyan that's effective on behalf of someone that hasn't been born yet. So we're asking the following question. You know what? If we're assuming that as far as the stepdaughter, the Bas Ishta, there was a kinyan, I'm going to tell you that you can interpret the Mishnah in a way that even as far as his own daughters, his biological daughters, there was a kinyan. How so? Milo askinin dahavu travayu b'shas kinyan hechidomi. How could it be that his biological daughters were alive at the time of the kinyan? Where it says the Ger Shavahadra, this is not his first marriage. He was married to another woman, and he had a daughter from that marriage, biological daughter. Then he divorced his wife. He remarried his wife. And now at the time of his second nisuin, when a new ischayvus was generated vis-a-vis his bas, who was born from the same wife but on a previous marriage, then she is clearly alive at the time of the ischayvus of the nisuin shneir. And why shouldn't the kinyan be valid? And why shouldn't there be shibudim? And why shouldn't be that mizonos for his biological daughter collectible from the lekuchos? And the Gemara answers, Ella, there's another reason why Kinyan is valid here and not valid there. Bito, if his own daughter, biological daughter, Tnai, Bezdin Kachla, this is part of the Ksuba, Tnai Bezdin, that she collects mizonos from her father's estate after her father's death. Lo mahani lo Kinyan. A Kinyan is not meaningful, is not valid to generate shibudim and allow collecting from lekuchas, but bas ishta lo b'tanai bezdin kachla. The rights of a stepdaughter to collect from the estate of her stepfather is purely generated by ischayvus. It's not generated by tanai bezdin, and therefore ischayvus lends itself to mahani ba kinyan, to a kinyan suda. So Gemara asks the obvious question: you're telling me that a biological daughter collects mizonos by virtue of Tanai Bezdin. That makes it so much more fundamental and powerful than a schayvus, which is flimsy and contingent. And now you're telling me that because the chova, the obligation of mizonos is Tanai Bezdin, therefore a kinyan is not valid. On the contrary, with the kal vachomer, the kinyan should be valid. I'm realizing that the fast is getting to me already. There's a fundamental difference between the chiv mizonos in this case that's generated by Tanai Bezdin and the chiv of a hischayvus that's outside of the purview of Tanai Bezdin in the case of Bas Ishto, as far as tzrari is concerned. What is tzrari? Tzrari means that often before a person dies, he wants to guarantee that his ksuba will be paid up, and in this case that the mizonos of his daughter will be supplied. So what does he do? He gives her tzrari. He gives her like jewels or something that's very valuable on the market. So basically, he's already paid up. And now, if she wants to collect from lekuchos, the lekuchos are being placed in a very precarious situation. They're gonna, we're gonna confiscate that property to pay up a chov when that chov was already paid up. The Baal before his death already gave into our hands a tzrar. The word tzrari means you have coins that are connected in a round tzrar of Mos. So he already paid up the mizonos. How could she now collect from Mishubadim? Now here we have to add Tosas's point that from Bnei Chori we allow her to collect, meaning from the Yorshim. And the Bonos will be able to demand mizonos from the Yorshim, and we're not being choshesh vat pasas tzor. So again, there's a fundamental difference. As far as lekuchos and shibudim are concerned, we have an argument to defend the lekuchos, protect their interest, called Dilma atfasei tzor. But as far as the Yorshim are concerned, which is an internal battle, here we're not choshesh for tzrori. And if the Yorshim want to claim that the husband, their father, already paid up the mizonos during his lifetime by tzrori, the burden of proof is on them. But now we get to the case of a stepdaughter of Bas Ishto. She collects mizonos, but not midin Tanai Bezdin, but rather midin ischayvus. And here, even though there was a kinyan for the schayvus, a kinyan suda, we're not choshesh for hatfasas tzrori. Hatfasas tzrori is only something that's done, that's performed with regard to Tanai Bezdin. Toshma Rabbi Nosson. Okay, now we have a brisa that's against both Ula and Rabbi Chanina. At least according to Rashi, Tosfos has a different approach. Amar Rabbi Nosson, Amosai, we have halacha that with regard to peiros of nechasim mishubadim, we will not collect from the lekuchos on peros. So ein motziin leperos minachasim mishubad. Says Rabbi Nassan, I'm going to limit that halacha. So we're talking about a stolen piece of karka that was sold. And clearly, once we bring evidence that this was a stolen property, then on the one hand, the karka has to go back to the nigzal, but on the other hand, since the karka was sold illegally to a buyer with achrayus, therefore that buyer will go to lekuchos, and he will, if the gazlan doesn't have money to pay, he will collect for the soda that he bought, and he paid for illegally, from the lekuchos, but he can only claim from the lekuchos the value of the karka itself as it was originally at the time of the mechira. But even though after the mechira he worked the land, he sowed and he plowed and he harvested, and it's worth that much more, and it went up in value on the market, that he can't collect from the lekuchos. Says Rabbi Nosson, that's only bisman shekodam mikcho shel sheni l'shvacho shel rishon. All the increment and the increase in the value of the karka took place before the gazlan sold the second karka to another buyer. Aval kodam shvacho shel rishon l'mikcho shel sheni. If after the first buyer who bought a stolen piece of karka was mashbiach the karka, and now it went up in value, and there are repairs on the karka, and that increases its value. And then subsequent to that point, after the shvach and the peros, the gazlan sold another piece of karka to another buyer, then goveh minachasim mishubad. He can collect, the first buyer who bought stolen karka can collect from the lekuchos not only the value of the karka as it was at the time of the mechira to the second lokeach, but even the shvach and even the peros. Alma, what do we see from this brisa? That what's the reason we don't collect from lekuchos mishum delo kodim hu? It's only because the chov came into being later on at the time of the karka. It's not because achilas peros or shvach was not written or it's not kotzu. Forget about all that. None of those factors kick in. The only reason why it wouldn't be goveh minachasim mishubadim is because it's something that didn't exist at the time of the second sale. So when the second lokeach purchased the karka, that increment, let's say from 50 to 100, the extra 50, did not even exist in the world. But according to both Ula and Rav Chanina, there's another reason why this is not collectible from the lekuchos, from the shubadim, and that's because it's not kotzuv and it's not kosuv. And the Gemara says Tanoihi. This whole issue about Ula and Rav Chanina is actually a machlokas Tanoim. The Sanya we learned in a brisa, ein motzi and lachilas peros l'shvach karkos l'mazon yishlav abodas l'chos v'shubadim le'tikun olam lefish ein ksuvim. Am Rabbi Yossi v'chimat tikun olam yesh bo zevalo ein ksuvim. According to the Tanakama, we exclude achilas peros and shvach karkos and mizonos from mishubadim because it's a milvav al pen. It's not written down. And with regard to a chov that's not written down in a shtar, it's not documented, we have to make a tikkun olam to exonerate the lekuchos from having to back up that chov. Why? Because otherwise you'll never buy anything, any field, because maybe there was a chov on the field, there's a lien on the field, and they're going to confiscate the field after you buy it. So this is the sheet of the Tanakama before Rabbi Yossi, and Ula holds like the Tanakama, which means that according to Ula, if a chov is written in a shtar, then it's collectible, even if it's not kotzu. So that the Tanakama puts all the emphasis here on the need for tikkun olam because it's not written in a shtar. If it would have been written in a shtar, there would be no need to protect the interests of the lekuchos and be mafkia the shibudim because there's a kol and he should know not to buy the field. But Rabbi Yossi says no. Ein ksuvin. It's not enough to tell me that there was a shtar, there wasn't a shtar. There's another critical factor here, and that's called ksuvin. The lokeach has to be forewarned about the sum of money that's included in the shibud. And even if you have a shtar, but the shtar doesn't supply you with ksuvim, for example, let's say there's a shtar ksuba, which indicates that the peiros are mishubadim, but there's no katsuv here. So Reb Chanina, who puts all the emphasis on ksuvim, katsuv, he holds like Rabbi Yosef. This is Hakofa Aleph, and we haven't even achieved half of Daf Nun Aleph. So now we go on to another sugya entirely, which is called the Takana of Meshev Aved. When a person returns a lost object, then even if he admits that this object belongs to so-and-so, but that so-and-so says that there were two objects, and therefore there should be a shvuas modum mixas, but we made a takana mishum tikkun olam to encourage people to return objects, that they will be exempt from a shvua when they return a lost object. So the Mishnah says, "Amotzi mitzia lo yishav." And now the Gemara wants to know: are there circumstances in which a motzi mitzia will take a shvua? Amar Rav Yitzchak, a man lost two how do you call it, purses of mos, and these two purses were tied together in a way that you can't separate them. And now the person finds and wants to return the lost object, but there's only one wallet, only one purse. Shnei kisim kshurim atzasali, and the person who lost his kisim, he says, you know what? You must have pocketed one of these two wallets. But the finder claims he only found one kiss. Nishba, he takes a shvuas modum miktas. However, there's a similar case with a different halacha in Shnei Shvarim Kshurim Atzasi. You found not only one shar, but you found two oxen that were tied together. Fala Omer, and the finder says, Lo hayakim echad, there was only one. Eino nishba, my timer. What's the difference between two kisim and two shvarim? Shvarim minatre me'adadi. It's very possible for the shvarim to break loose and separate one from the other. And therefore we believe the taina of the motzi that he only found one shar. The loser, on the other hand, has what's called a taina shema. He doesn't know whether or not the two shvarim broke away one from the other, and they separate themselves, and the motzi found only one shar. So his taina that the motzi found two shvarim and stole one of them is a taina shema, and we have a principle ein nishbar al taina shema. But kisim lo menatchi me'adadi. Generally speaking, when you tie together two purses, it's a very tight knot, that cannot be easily taken up. So the ma'abe, the one who lost his kiss, he has a tainis bari, and therefore the motzi has to take a shvur. Rav Yitzchak continues. Shnei shvarim kshurim atzasi. Now the ma'abed says that you found two shvarim kshurim. Allah omer matzasi v'chzarti l'cha echad mehem. Yes, it's true, I did find two shvarim, but I gave you back one of them. Hareza nishba, he takes a shvuas modu miktas. Another halacha. V'Rav Yitzchak lesle amotzi mitzia lo yishav b'nei tikron. We have a halacha that's incorporated into the Mishnah, that someone who finds something doesn't have to take a shvuah. It's a tikkun olam to encourage people to return avedos.